Hello everybody, welcome to a very special edition of Art Whisperer 88. Now on your screen is a black and white photo of my subject matter for today's watercolor. This is Grace, and Grace is a rescue horse, and she was rescued last December from a kill pen in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania by my good friend Amy. And Amy decided to adopt Grace, which is no small decision. And according to Amy, adopting Grace was the very best thing she had ever done. And it has changed her life. And I'm so happy for Grace, and I'm happy for Amy. I will put Amy's Instagram as well as Grace's Instagram in the link in my description box. So I have two reference photos. One is a black and white. I can determine the range of values from light to dark. Like the darkest parts are her eyes, her nose, her blanket, and then gradually work my way up the scale to the lightest portions of her head. And lastly, I will work on the background, which is a scene from the horse farm that she is. So anyway, let me get started. And I will start by doing a light wash. And since it's such a large area, I'm going to do it in increments. Okay, this is the preliminary wash, just to lay down the first coat of brown, and my next step will be to do her blanket and some of the um, hay on the ground, since this is a farm. So most of this ground is covered with hay, but I want to let this dry first, and I will be right back. Okay, back from a short break. This is completely dry, and I have more confidence to continue on a piece when the initial washes are dry, because sometimes when you work too fast, it's difficult to control the areas, especially for a large picture like this, where I have to work in small parts. So anyways, my next step is to work around the eye area, which is the darkest part of the photo, the ears, and her nostril, under her cheeks, with a much darker uh, wash of a mix of black and let's see, burnt umber. And like I said, I don't really go by the color names. I really instinctively mix colors by sight, and this is from years and years of experience. So anyways, I'm gonna make a darker wash for the darker areas of the face. Okay, I'm going to take another break. This is the mid-tone where I put the intermediate values on the front of her head, and I'm going to let this dry. As a final touch, the fur will be emphasized by colored pencil, and that colored pencil best represents fur because of all the fine light colored lines to make this portrait more convincing. But that's a final step. So I'll take another break, let the secondary wash dry, and I will be right back. Okay, back from a short break, and in the meantime I mixed a whole bunch of blue for her straps. I don't know the technical term for it, but in the original photo it's a very bright electric blue, and I'm toning it down so it's not so distracting. So I made it into more like a faded denim color. So it would look like this instead of the electric blue. So it's a softer blue. Then I can add the detail of the brass fixtures later. Okay, that's it for her strap. And now I'm going to do her blanket. Now her blanket is kind of like a faded denim as well, but it has a more grayish tone to it. So since it's such a large area, I have to do it in sections. Now, since this is not the main subject matter, I'm not going to put in too much detail, just enough to define it as her blanket. The original photo shows a lot of stitching and straps and buckles and whatnot. I'm just going to create an impression of fabric. So I will intentionally leave these areas around the periphery of the portrait sort of semi-unfinished. I'll do most of the detail on her fur, her eyelashes, for example, and the nap of her fur with colored pencil. Okay, so that is a step 3 with her blanket and her, I have to look up the definition of this strap here. I know there's a term for it. I will be right back. We'll give this a couple of minutes to dry, and then I will proceed to work on the backdrop and the sky. Okay, I'm back from a short break, and now I'm going to work on the background sky since I have the blue paint mixed up. So I'm borrowing a technique from printmaking where you create a stencil to mask out certain items. So this is the horizon line. This is where, more or less here, this is where the sky starts. Some trees here in the distance. Now I want to mask the top part of her head, and it's such a large area that it would not be practical for me to use masking fluid. I'd be using half the bottle if I did. So instead, I'm borrowing this technique from printmaking. This is contact paper. I'm going to lay down the contact paper. I cut this straight, made sure that it's a 90-degree cut. Okay, I'm just pressing this firmly down so the wash doesn't leak through. I mean, if it does, it's not a huge tragedy, but I might as well do it right. Okay, So the contact paper does a good job in keeping her ears dry. The original photo was taken on an overcast day, so I'm just adding a little more of the blue sky to make it a little more interesting, give contrast to the portrait. That's it for the sky, and just as a safety precaution, I will just blot the excess water. And I think this technique is a lot easier than using masking fluid. Okay. So that is my little hack. If you happen to have contact paper, it makes an excellent mask. But you have to check if it's still fresh. In other words, if it still has stickiness. If not, the watercolor will just bleed through. Just fill in these spaces here. And then later I'm going to go over this with color pencil. That's it for the sky. Okay, now I'm going to do the patches of hay on the ground. So I mixed up some yellow ochre and going to do very light wash because it's a fairly light color. Okay, I'm taking another short break to let the background and the details dry. Now once it's dry, I'm coming in with a rubber eraser and try to clean up some of the excess pencil and add maybe some detail, not a lot, of the stitching and the folds and the buckles. I did eliminate some of the strap here because it's distracting. So I think I'm coming to the home stretch here. I think the portrait is coming together so far. Just a little more detail, like the rails of the wooden fence, and maybe a little pen and ink here and there. So I'll be right back. Okay, back from a short break. Now I'm just going to do some detail work on the background. It's the roof of, I think this is a stable. So where the horses are kept. And I'm using a mixing white Okay, I think we are at the final portion of this video, and I'm using my favorite white ink gel pen. It's called a Uniball Signal, and I like to use it for small details like this stitching. It's very opaque and it gives a very fine line. This would be very difficult to do with a brush, and usually if you use watercolor mixing white, it rarely takes because it's not opaque enough. So this is an ideal tool to use to make details like this. For example, this is stitching on the blanket. There we go. Now this, by the way, is Fabriano Artistico paper. This is a very good watercolor paper, and it handles the wash very well. It dries quickly, maybe like within 5-10 minutes. And it's a pleasure to use. Okay. Just some little highlights. Again, these would be very difficult to do with watercolor because it's rarely opaque enough. So I'll just put some fine hairs here. And try to make them kind of random, just to suggest fur. Now, fur is one of the most difficult things to represent in a painting, and it requires a lot of practice. So I hope this is convincing. Just add these little highlights here and there, and they do make a difference. Okay, we're almost there. Okay. I am going to call this portrait of Grace finished, and I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a little long because the image is complicated, but I was very happy to do this for my friend Amy and for Grace, wishing her a long and happy life. And it's wonderful that her life was changed, and in turn, Grace has changed the life of Amy as well, giving her so much joy. So thank you so much for subscribing and watching, and I will see you next time.